and in one gradual, even movement, I pull them up towards the top of the pot, and like previously mentioned, I come off this section of the pot very gently when I reach it. You don't want to keep throwing and sort of pinch through it like this. Instead, you want to reach a certain point and leave it at a certain thickness, and remove your fingers very gently from the form. For the second pull, essentially, I do the exact same thing. I make sure that the walls, both inside and outside, are nice and wet, and then I push in with my knuckle around the bottom, forming a groove, and then I pull that clay up, and as I'm pulling, I don't hesitate, I don't suddenly speed up or slow down. Instead, I really try to keep the movement as consistent as possible. If you pull the walls up in an irregular manner, say you hesitate for a moment and keep pressure on one spot, you end up creating a ring around the pot that's thinner than any other portion, and this, if it occurs in the wrong place, can easily cause the walls to buckle and the pot to deform. Ultimately, the biggest piece of advice I can give you for this stage is to just practice over and over and over again. Pull cylinders until they break. Pull them as tall as you can. Pull them quickly. Pull them up slowly. At the start, what you're learning is the limitations of the material that you work with. So it's best not to be too precious about the pots you're making. Simply throwing a dozen cylinders until they break is incredibly good practice. Now, if you watch my fingertips here, I'm going to purposefully show you what happens if you remove them too quickly from the pot you're working on. And although it's subtle, you might be able to see the slight undulation that removing them quickly imparted on the vessel. So instead, when I remove my fingers, it's done so incredibly gently, rather than quickly, like this. And if you do this once, perhaps it isn't the worst thing, but if you do it 5 or 6 times consecutively as you're throwing, it can really make your pot far more wobbly than it should be. As the pot gets taller, there's still some reserves of clay towards the base. You'll see that my knuckle on the outside pushes in that slope of clay that was around the base and pulls that up. And as soon as my 2 hands are close enough, you'll see that I'll connect them, adding stability to the upper parts of the pull. And from this view, you can really envisage where my fingertips are on the inside, pushing that bulge slightly outward, whilst my knuckle glides up just underneath it, forcing that clay up towards the top. You can also, if you want, use a sponge on the outside to help you pull up the walls of clay. If you find the walls keep drying out too quickly, this can be helpful, although you don't want to become too reliant on it, as by using a sponge you are sacrificing some of the feeling that you have just by using your fingertips. So to negate that as much as possible, I make sure that I use a thin sponge, so there's as little as possible between my fingertip